Before we begin, Eric, my colleague, is also on the line with us on the chat. So, if you have any questions, we've muted all lines to, prevent any background noises. But, if any questions, feel free to, type them in the chat and Eric will answer it. Or if there's something that we have to specifically address, he'll bring it up. Okay, all right. So I'm just going to spend like the next minute or two just quickly giving a recap of, Snap in general, our teams and all of that. So essentially the pretty faces you see on the screen are is what makes up the Snap COE, right? There's me and Eric who are based out of the United States, and the remaining three of them are Matisse, Sagor, and Yirji they are based out of Prague, right? So this is essentially the Snap COE team. So when you work on any deployment, we are pretty much the teams that you will be in constant touch with. Okay, role of the Snap COE, our responsibility is essentially, quality assurance and, ensuring the success of a deployment, right? So we essentially work with, once a Snap deal is sold, we will work with your teams to make sure that, the deployment is successful and, and the quality of the deployment is where it's meant to be, right? Okay, moving on. Okay, so agenda for today, right? So we want to give you like a quick overview of the playbook. Now, I know for some of the folks on this, I see some familiar names from our last session, but there might be folks on this who are attending for the first time. So, just to give you a quick overview of the playbook and our supporting documents so that you know exactly where you should be going if you need any materials. Okay. Uh, we plan to do an overview of an SAP Ariba portal called as Connect, right? We want to briefly touch on the SSO topic. There are things, there are certain documents that our team has come up with which will be useful for you in deployment. So those are all the integration tracker, data dictionary. We'll quickly touch on these points, what these docs are. Then another point that we want to cover and is pretty important is the multi-ERP setup, right? So this is something that something new that's being rolled out for all Snap deployments. So we think it's pretty important that you as partners are aware of the way that a site's going to be configured when it comes over to you guys, right? Then we're going to do a quick integration overview and finish it off with general admin and if time permits, a spot by admin demo as well. So the spot by admin demo, this was something that we kind of ran out of time when we did the procurement persona last week. So if time permits, we'll make sure that we just show you a high level overview of what the admin features are in SpotBuy, right? And last of all, there's Q&A. So we want to do this a little different because this is a persona that has considerable amount of topics that needs to be covered. So if we just put questions at the end, it kind of becomes a little you know you'll have we'll have a lot of questions to ask. So what we'll be doing is, after each of these sections, we'll take a pause and, if there's any questions, you can put it in chat while I'm going through the presentation as well, and we can answer it. So we will pause for questions after each of these topics and then move on because each of these topics are a little detailed. And if we, if we, there's always time for Q&A at the end. Okay. Um, okay. So the how is Snap deployed, right? Most of you should know this by now, but Snap is essentially a persona-based deployment, right? So we have identified 5 different personas that are important in any deployment. So we have the end user, the procurement, the AP finance, the IT admin, and the supplier personas, right? These are the key personas that we've identified in the deployment. And this is based off the agile methodology where each of these personas we take them through 6 sprints, right? And each sprint is basically 2 weeks of is has a 2 week timeline. So essentially, that 6 times 2, 12. That's essentially how we uh, you know help a client go live in 12 weeks, right? So we've done 3 of these personas so far. And today is the fourth persona, the IT and the admin persona. So we will talk you through all the details of what are the typical topics that you should be talking to um, with a customer when you're on a deployment. Okay. Now, bear in mind, this is not a deep dive into any of these topics, right? Because, we could go on for hours on just one of these topics. So this is at a very high level just to get all of your feet wet on, what exactly should I be considering when I'm talking to the IT folks on a Snap deployment. Okay. Um, Resources by work stream. This is just a quick, time. Basically is telling that, okay, on a deployment, when you're working with the customer, how much percent of their time would you actually require on the deployment, right? So essentially, you can see that, in sprint one, the initial sprint, you just need 25% of their time, right? That's the sprint where they are getting, uh, familiar with the system, right? Then you see that in sprint two, right? That's the configuration phase where you're actually configuring the system. That's the phase, where you see that all the personas have a high rate of involvement, right? Yeah, end users typically don't have a lot of involvement. They mainly come in during the testing phase, but you see that they have a high rate of involvement there. And then, in the next few sprints, you see that, you're keeping on adding content, and then the validation, which is basically testing, and then the production phase, um, that's when you're actually doing the cutover into production. So an important thing to note here is if you see the IT and the admin persona, the percentage of their time that we need is not um, it's substantially higher than the rest of the other work streams, right? And the reason for that is, IT is a team that needs to be dialed in throughout the deployment, right? At no point can we say that, yeah, IT, you know what, let's not talk to them until sprint four, because that they are basically the team that connects the two, connects the Snap Reba buying and invoicing instance with the customer's ERP. So it's very important that you get engaged with this persona right at the start. Okay. Um, okay. The playbook, right? Most of you should be aware of it. This is on our SnapJam. Most of you should have access to our SnapJam by now. If you do not have access, please, send us a request at snap.coe@sap.com. Eric can put that in the chat, and if you need to get you can send a request right now itself, and we can make sure that you get added to the group. Okay, so this is essentially the playbook that we have here is basically what should be followed when you're doing a deployment, right? And we'll take you through the playbook as well as we go through these, the sprint persona. Okay. Um, okay. Snap Toolbox. So both of these tools, right? The playbook and the toolbox needs to be used together, right? The playbook is basically a strategy for you to complete the deployment, right? And toolbooks are basically, think of it as your, the ammo in your arsenal to kind of, fight the battle, if you will, right? So it's basically, these are important things that we have put in here based on, what we've seen across past deployments, right? So there are very important documents in here which kind of explains different concepts, and it's something that we constantly update on a regular basis, right? So I want to say that this is a living and breathing uh, document, if you will, right? So we constantly make sure that we keep adding content onto this, and so if at any point if there is something on your deployments that you think that this is something that we need to be covering, then you need to you can just always reach out to us, and we'll make sure that we add content, the relevant content for that. Okay. All right, so that was just a quick recap. I'm sorry I had to kind of rush through that because, like I said at the start, some of you might have already seen this and you already know it. So just to make sure the rest of the folks are caught up. Okay, now moving on to the first topic, right? Connect overview. Okay, so and what we will be doing in this session, this is going to be a very demo intensive session, right? What we want to do is we want to take you as much as possible into the system and not just bore you with, like, a lot of just PowerPoint slides. So you will have to follow along a bit. So, and if I'm going too fast, please feel free to, just type in the chat that, hey, can you ask him to slow down? All right. Let me quickly just get the. All right. Okay. So what is Ariba Connect, right? Ariba Connect is essentially it's a portal that Ariba provides, which is available to both customers uh, and partners, right? So what Connect is basically it's a portal which is your I want to put it your say it as your eyes into Ariba, right? So there are so many important things out on Connect that we should be that you as deployment partners should be aware of, and it's frankly one of the most important tools that we push our partners to during a deployment as well. Okay, so we'll go through these. So one of the things that we always suggest to our partners is that please get yourself registered on Connect as soon as possible. Right now, there are requirements that need to be fulfilled. I think you need to be an SAP Rebus certified partner, and we can get details on that. But as soon as possible, please get yourself registered on Connect. Let me just show you how the initial, I think. Okay, so this is the initial screen that you come across. There are options here to say, okay, request a login for Ariba Connect. So please make sure, guys, that when you can request access right away. You might not get access depending on where you are in terms of being a certified partner. But this is something that once you're on a deployment, every single team member of yours on the deployment should have access to Connect. And the reason why we say that is when you reach out to us with questions and all, we are always going to make sure that you as a partner are empowered to do the deployment, right? So, we're not going to be giving you like answers right away. We're going to tell you that, hey, this particular information is out on the Connect article here, on this particular Connect article, and we'll send you the link, right? So it's very important that you have access to Connect, or make sure that your deployment team members all have access to Connect right at the start of the deployment. Okay, so what exactly can you do on Connect, right? So there are a bunch of things that you can do, and we'll quickly go over that. So one of the most important thing is service requests, right? Now, service requests are essentially it's basically a customer's way to kind of request a certain service from from Ariba, right? So let's just say you have a request to like get a particular feature turned on the customer side, right? So essentially what they would do is they would need to come into connect.ariba.com and raise a service request, right? Now, the scenario that I just told you is probably the most basic scenario for service requests, right? Now, service requests are not just to like request features, it's for any kind of things, right? If there's a defect that has been identified in the system, then that's a service request, right? If there is like, some parameters or some customizations or anything that needs to be requested, then that's a service request. But guys, please bear in mind the service request is not something that we push to create during the course of the deployment, right? During the course of a Snap deployment, you're working closely with the Ariba Center of Excellence, the Snap Center of Excellence, right? And you will be coming to us on a regular basis. We have weekly touch points with the teams, right? Once you're on a deployment, and we discuss all the issues that you have. Unless and until we are convinced that this is a service request, we will not direct you to raise a service request, simply because a service request might take time to get resolved, right? And if for some reason, if you're already on a very aggressive timeline, and if you have a service request that takes like 5 weeks to get resolved, then you're already overshooting your timelines here. So what we do is when you come to us with requests, unless we are truly convinced that this is a defect, that's the only scenario where we say that, okay, no, go ahead, please raise a service request. Else, during the course of the deployment, there should be no service requests raised at all, right? And one of the questions we always get is, okay, so we need to raise a service request. How do I raise a service request, right? So the way that you can do that, and there are little things that out here which will guide you through that, is right on top here, there's a video up here. It's a quick 5-minute video which basically shows how you should be creating a service request, right? I'm not going to go through the entire video, but this is right out here where it says, okay, how should you be creating a service request, right? And one of the things that we always tell our partners is that, if we advise you to raise a service request, always please make sure that there's a lot of content in there, right? There's enough information out there so that the when support picks it up for the very first time, they know exactly what your problem is and they can get right away to solving it. Most of the times, what we've seen is, when we said that, a support ticket takes time to get resolved, what we see is because, the person who created the request just wrote something like, "Hey, this is not working," right? That was pretty much it. That one line was with their service request. And while that's that's an easy way out, that what happens with that is you will end up, having to the support person is then going to send you like, okay, can you explain a little bit more? So that the number of interactions increase a lot, because of which the time to get resolve these SRs take a while. Okay, so that is one aspect of Connect, right? The second is in terms of documentation, right? So one of the key things, again, during your deployment that you will need is documentations, right? So if there is any documentations that you need to get access to, right? It could be something like procurement administration guide or something like that, right? Oh, let's go with something simple. Guided buying administration guide. If I could spell that right. Okay, so you see how it gives you access to all the different guides, and it's not just that just on these one guides. There are a lot of things out here, right? Spot buy, purchasing units, how do you do catalogs and guided buying. Right now it's showing me everything related to guided buying, but you this is a place where you can always go and look for documentations out there. Okay, so that's another important aspect is documentations. All right. The next piece of it, and which is again one of a very important aspect, is release documentations, right? So I'm not sure if everyone is aware on this. Reba used to always be on a yearly basis, right? There used to be one major release every year. Somewhere along the road they made that a quarterly release, right? Which basically they had every 3 months a release happening, and then they've gone and changed it to a release every month. So essentially, every month there is a release happening on the Ariba solutions platform, right? So it's kind of hard for you to kind of to just say that, okay, I'm going to take a look at all the new features once every 3 months, right? You probably missed 3 months of features that Ariba has been releasing with their monthly releases. So this is an important place for you to kind of stay up to date with all the latest information that is available. And this is not just across buying and invoicing, it's across all the Ariba solutions, right? Procurement, invoicing, Ariba network, cloud integrations. So let me just show you quick how you can get to that. Okay, so there are other features where you can click to. Let me just show you the easy way to get to that, and then okay, so okay, just so you guys followed that, I was on release readiness, right? And it takes me right here, right? So here, right here to your right, if you see, it gives you exactly, okay, the Ariba network release guide, SAP Ariba applications release guide, and there's all the Q&A, everything that was done for the October release, right? The Q&A presentations, the replays, Q&A responses, all of that is here. And this right here, SAP Ariba applications release guide, is basically the October 2018 release guide, right? So this would basically tell you what are the new features that came in October in the system, right? It's not limited to just, as you can see here, it goes all the way back, right? You can see releases what happened in September, August, July, June. And if there are, for most part of the releases, there's always a couple of things, right? There's always new features or there are code fixes. Now, if code fixes get released, they are kind of released into the system, right? But if there is a new feature that is going to be part of a release, it's not going to be, just released into a customer's instance and, we kind of say, hey, good luck. Most of the release, the features that are being put into the system, they're always controlled, which basically means that, you can, it's always at the customer's discretion that, okay, do we need to turn this feature on or off? By default, they're all off. But, if there's something that you need to turn on, that's where, if the customer is already live, they reach out to Rebus support with a service request saying, hey, can we have this new feature turned on? Or if we are still deploying, if it's a Snap deployment, that's when you as the deployment team reaches out to us, the Rebus COE, the Snap COE, and tell us that, hey guys, can we please turn this feature on? The customer is interested in using this feature, right? And of course, we will have that discussion with you that, hey guys, is this a complicated feature that's being released, or is this like a simple feature of, which controls maybe some defaulting, right? If it's a complicated feature, that's where we'll ask you that, do we really need this to be part of phase one? Right? Because anytime you add a feature and if there's a complex deployment around it, we're looking at increasing the timelines. And once that happens, you're overshooting timelines, and then it's a downhill slope from there. Okay. So applications release guides. This is important for your teams to know exactly how and where you can access it. Okay. So those are pretty much okay. And another section that you need to be aware of is enhancement requests, or enhancement requests and customer influence, right? So, uh, so there are always features that are, desirable, that certain customer has a certain requirement that, hey, I need this particular feature in the solution. And it is possible that the Ariba solution does not have that feature, right, at that particular point in time. Right? So if they don't have that feature, there's always a customer can go ahead and create something called as an enhancement request, right? What that basically does is you're basically asking Ariba that, hey, I need this particular feature as because it's important for our business, right? And I'm talking about customer creating that enhancement request. Now it is now they can create the enhancement request, and what exactly happens is, there's something called as a customer influence that has been started. So this is pretty recent. So when a customer creates all these, all these requests, saying I want this particular enhancement in the feature, what happens is all of that goes into a pool, and this then gets voted on, right? So and what essentially then happens is, okay, once it gets voted, the feature that bubbles up right to the top, where they see that, okay, there's been a significant request for this particular feature, that's what the Reba P&I team then pick up that particular feature and they work on it. Now, it's not to say that, if you request a feature by, let's just say, Jan of this year, or Jan of 2019, you're going to get it by Feb 2019. No, that's not going to happen. It might happen, but mostly, it's totally at the discretion of the P&I teams, where they, how they rate which feature needs to be a part of which release. But a customer can always raise that request, and the more requests that keep coming in, the more that particular feature or the need for that feature bubbles up to the top, and that's how they get eyes on it to say, okay, looks like a feature that most of our customers, 90% of our customers are asking for, so we definitely need to consider this, right? So this is essentially where you come to create that. I know I mentioned enhancement requests right at the start there. So enhancement requests is basically the older version of customer influence, right? So you would essentially come in here, and this is where you would create your own enhancement request. Now we as Reba personnel cannot create that because we can't request enhancement requests on the product, but as a customer, they can always create those enhancement requests here, and we can always get that all voted on. Okay. And you can see here, right there, they have like 18 opportunities, 17 active, some are open for submission or registration. So there are a lot of things out here that a customer can do. Okay. Another important point that we need to kind of to go through is the fact of a designated support contact, right? Now, it's also called as DSC. Now, a DSC is basically a person who can create service requests and enhancement requests, customer influence, all of these stuff. Now, please bear in mind that not everybody can be a DSC in the system, right? When a customer buys a certain Ariba product, um, they get like three designated support contacts per product, right? So if they brought Ariba buying and invoicing, they get three. Let's just say they brought sourcing two, so they get another three for sourcing, right? So it's you have three designated support contacts, and it's not more than that. So if a customer has uh, you have to, if you do not have access to create an SR, only designated support contacts can create service requests in the system. So what we kind of tell most of our partners is, hey, it's more effective if a partner goes and creates a service request as opposed to like, someone who's a designated support contact who's not even, working on the deployment on a regular basis. You ask them to create an SR, chances are they're going to go create an SR which says, hey, something's not working, right? That's it. So it's more effective when a partner who's actually doing the deployment. So what we kind of say is that, can you get yourself added as designated support contact for that customer, right? So what that needs to happen is that customer's existing DSC or designated support contact just needs to put a request in to say that, okay, hey, can we please add this particular person as a designated support contact for this particular account, right? And then support will take care of that and get them added, and then that way you can go ahead and create SRs on behalf of the customer, thereby providing more accurate information. Okay, I'm not going to spend more time on Connect. This is again something that your team should get access to and start getting familiar with. There's also a section here called as download software, which also is a pretty important section. So this is where you go if you have to like download software from Ariba, right? Now this could be so many different things, right? There could be like the integration toolkit. If the customer was on a CI cloud integration release, the latest cloud integration release. So there's all these places that you can go and upload to. So this is one of the reasons why we say that, okay, the if a partner has access to these solutions, they will be more effective on deployments. Okay. All right. So with that, I think I'll stop talking about Connect in general. Eric, in the chat, is there any specific questions around this, or you on mute, Eric?
No, there were a couple questions, but I think I've answered them, so I think we're good to go.
Okay. All right,
There was one, CIG and native integration. You're going to do a high-level overview of integrations, right?
Yeah. There is a section
Okay, cool.
which we are going to just briefly touch on that as well at a very high level.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So moving on, guys. Connect overview. I think we spent some time on that. I hope you guys got a good understanding, or at least a basic overview of how Connect works and how important it is for our deployments. Okay. Single sign-on, right? So this is again a common question that we get from our partners is, regarding single sign-on for the deployment, right? So Ariba as such, Ariba does not provide a single sign-on solution, which basically means that, there's no solution that Ariba has to say that, oh, hey, here's Okta or, you know, or whatever the other zones are, one login and all of those. Like that, these are not solutions that Ariba provides or recommends. So from an SSO perspective, a customer is always free to use whatever SSO mechanism that they have, right? We don't recommend any, neither do we say that, something's, oh yeah, please don't use this one because Ariba does not work with it. Ariba typically works with every single um, uh, SSO mechanism that's available in the market. I have not seen any to date that it does not work with. Of course, there was some that, that's a little challenging to work with, like Microsoft Azure, I think, is a little challenging, but again, it has worked in the past and it's something that Ariba does work with, right? So, you might get that question from your customers that, okay, is Ariba going to support SSO? The answer to that is yes, Ariba does support SSO. And what we do not do is we don't provide any SSO mechanism from our side, right? We do support SSO, and I'll go over how that whole mechanism is supported. So if you see on our screen right now here, it talks about the SSO mechanism, right? So you again, the slides are all going to be made available to you guys so you can read through it, but at very high level, what happens is when a user is trying to access the Ariba solution, let's just say SSO has been turned on for that site, right? What Ariba is going to do is, we are going to create a SAML request from Ariba, right? And we're going to redirect that request to the customer's SSO mechanism, right? So this could be anything on their side, right? Like any of the solutions that we had mentioned before, right? So that SAML request goes on to the customer's SSO mechanism, and then all the authentication actually happens on the customer side, right? So what we as Ariba is essentially doing is we are basically just redirecting the browser to the customer's authentication mechanism. Now, once there, it finishes off the authentication, right? Like it hits up against the customer's Active Directory and does all the other necessary checks. And once that is done, that's when they will send a request back. They will send a successful response to that SAML request that we send, right? Saying that, okay, user XYZ, he's good, right? We've authenticated him and he can be provided access to the system, right? So when that is done, that's when the mechanism is like the SSO mechanism is complete. So once that authentication response is successful and we get that response back from the customer's SSO mechanism, we then release the user into the system, right? Until then, if for whatever reasons it fails, then the user is going to say that user is going to see a user is not authenticated error screen there. Okay, so this is at a very high level how the SSO mechanism works, right? Ariba gets a request, it redirects it to the customer's SSO mechanism. SSO mechanism resolves that, authenticates it, and then says, oh, yep, good to go, and sends a response back. And Ariba then lets you access the system, right? So for any of you folks who are on the line, and if you are like, into all these SSOs and details, Ariba supports both SP initiated and IDP initiated SSO mechanism, right? So it's whether it's a server side initiated response or if it's from the identity provider itself, all of that is supported by Ariba. So there's no, if you get those kind of questions from your customer, always, just say that yes, these are all supported by Ariba. Now, the one thing that I need to point out is, on this particular this SSO mechanism is actually that one point in the deployment where we actually need to talk to the customer as well, right? Not for their questions on, hey, how do I do this and all. That's still the deployment team, but configuring SSO for a particular customer, you need Ariba, that is the COE's help on that, right? So because that's area of the code that you as a partner do not have access to that. So if you get, if when a customer is ready to test their SSO, at that point in time, you will need to schedule a call with, with us, the COE and the customers, SSO teams, and then, that's where we work through that whole SSO mechanism and say that, okay, we've configured everything, and now we are ready for a quick test. Bear in mind, there's information that needs to be exchanged between Ariba and the customer's team, right? So there's like the metadata that is something that both the teams have, right? So when you tell us that, okay, hey, customer XYZ needs to set up their SSO, we'll say, okay, that's good. Here's the Ariba metadata. Please give us the customer's metadata, and using that metadata, we will configure things on our side, and using our metadata, Ariba's metadata, they will configure things on their end, right? And once that is done, at that point in time, we are ready for a quick test. Oftentimes, it's a quick half an hour call, where we's like, okay, so we set everything up. Let's just do a quick test with the user and it's done. Now, there are scenarios where we might have to do some troubleshooting, but so far we've not seen any of these SSO calls take more than 30 minutes. So this is the only one point in the whole deployment where you actually involve Ariba with the customer, right? Other than that, it's always the partner for every single sprint, every persona, right? When you're working with the customer, it's always the deployment team. It's only for the SSO part where, we need to get involved. Okay, so I'm not going to go into details on this one here, right? So just things that you need to remember is that, activating SSO is a site-wide activity. So, once you do that, it's not like, I have 5 users who want to use SSO and the other 5 I don't want for them to be enabled via SSO. I just want them to use a user ID and password. That's not possible. When the moment you enable that, it's every single customer user end users will get redirected to the authentication mechanism, right? There is one way though where you can still access the system via user ID and password. By default, when we give you the sites after our pre-configuration, SSO is not turned on because we don't have any of the customer data from them regarding the SSO. So at that point, you're accessing the system via user ID and password, right? Only when it's turned on is when it automatically does the whole single sign-on piece of it. Now, there is a way that if you as a partner may not be defined in the customer's Active Directory. Now, when that happens and the site's been turned on for SSO, when you try to access the system, you're going to keep getting that user is not authenticated error. So what we recommend as a best practice is that all partners who are working on the deployment needs to be set up as a third-party user, right? So that's a way to set up a user in the system. You can set up a user as an enterprise user or a third-party user. If you set the person up as a third-party user, at that point, you can still access the site which has been turned on for SSO using your user ID and password, right? Now, you can't have a user do both, right? You can't have a user have, oh, I want to do both enterprise user and a third-party user. It's either or, right? So you either be defined as a third-party user or you're defined as an enterprise user in the system, okay? And what else do we have? Yeah, okay. So the name ID, um, that's it's again, more details into that. Essentially, what this is saying is that, whatever is the name that unique name of that user in the system, that must match case by case, right? So, for example, if let's just go with John Doe, right? If it is john.doe at xyz.com is the username of that system, this particular attribute, the name ID, is something that is exchanged between these two SSO systems, right? Between Ariba and the customer's SSO system. And that particular information must match for case as well, right? So if you have john.doe with, you defined it in the system as uppercase JOHN dot doe at xyz.com, but in the customer's Active Directory, it's defined as lowercase JOHN dot doe at xyz. That user, when they try to log on, they're going to get the user does not exist kind of error, right? Because Ariba kind of looks for that exact case of the unique name that's being set. So it's important that when you're setting up unique names in the system for the customer, you need to make sure that that's exactly how it is defined in the customer's Active Directory, right? If that is not done, then when you turn on SSO, they're going to be in all sorts of trouble. Okay. So we already touched on the next point. I said Ariba supports both IDP and SP initiated. Yes, that's true. And most of the time, if what we do say is that if a customer does not really care about SSO, like, which flavor of this, do we do IDP or do we do SP? We kind of always say, what, let's just do IDP, right? That we know is pretty straightforward and can be done. SP initiated one is sometimes a little tricky, right? When I say tricky, it'll still work, but it might, might require some extensive troubleshooting. So if the customer doesn't have a choice, just always tell them that let's just go with IDP initiated. Now, if they have a choice, that's okay. We can still work with them to make sure that it's working fine, right? Um, what else? Yeah. So test and production SSO setups are independent of each other, right? So that's we have to individually configure SSO for both the production side and the test side, right? It's not like if you just do it for the test side, it automatically ports over to the production side as well. If the test needs to be because even the information that you get from Ariba, like the URLs and everything is different between test and production. So it's important that you're aware of it, that when we do SSO, you need to individually set it up first in test, and then another session needs to be set up to set that in prod as well. Okay. Uh, Yeah, so this is just basically saying, remember I told you at the start that, there's information that needs to be exchanged between Ariba and the customer when they're doing an SSO. So these are essentially the things. We won't go into all these details. It's just login URL, logout URL, the certs, right? That's what we need from the customer, and Ariba will provide you all these, assertion, consumer service URLs, and the certificate. And all of this information, guys, is present in the metadata that I was talking about, right? So maybe you don't have to break it out like this. We'll give you the metadata, you just pass that on to the customer, and that's it, right? You don't have to like break down all these pieces of information. The metadata generally contains all this information. So whatever they give us, we have all these three pieces of information that we need from them, and whatever metadata we give them, all these information is already present in them. Okay. All right. Okay. So that kind of concludes our high-level overview of SSO. Do we have any questions on that? We can pause for a few questions if there are any.
There were a couple questions, and I answered. One was, if this needs to be set up post deployment, does the customer need to raise an SR? And yes, the customer does need to raise an SR. And then the
Right.
other was a question around, setting up in test, in dev, and then turning off, but always keeping it set up in production. So I answered that one as well. So I think we're good.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool.
The one point, that question on, do you need to raise an SR to set in production? Ideally, yes, you definitely need to, but that scenario should never rise unless, of course, they were not ready at the time of go live with that. So, what we always say is if you're doing it in test and you're ready, let's just do it in production right away too. But yeah, if you need to do it post deployment and they were not ready for it at the time of deployment, that's fine. You can always call in and raise an SR, and they will Reba support will work with you to provide you all that information. Okay. All right. Moving on. Integration tracker. Okay. So this is now going into the details of the deployment. I think I need to kind of go into the site itself. Okay, so maybe I'll use this session to kind of even talk to you about the playbook and the different sections under the IT persona. Okay. So this is the IT persona, right? This right here. So this is our toolbox that we have here, and one of the sections that you see here is the Snap integration tracker and customization tracker. Okay, now in this session, in this particular part of this session, what I want to do is I want to go over the integration tracker. I want to just briefly touch over something called as the data dictionary, and then also just touch on the customization tracker, right? And where all these documents will be used. Okay, so the integration tracker, guys, is honestly something that Ariba has put together, which we found out to be very beneficial for a customer, right? Well, sorry, not a customer, the deployment team. Customers also can get, once you guys roll off, that's something that you can pass on to them, and they can use in during their deployments as I'm sorry, when after the fact that they've gone live too. It's something that you can constantly use. So let me just bring that up and kind of talk you through it. It is a little bit a lot of a lot of content on it. So Bear with me, I'll try to make it as simple as possible. And then, if you have questions, please put that in the chat, or if you have anything after the session, you can always reach out to us if you have questions around this. Okay, should be here now. Sorry guys, give me 1 second. It's just loading on my other screen. Okay. Okay, the integration tracker, right? So what exactly is an integration tracker, right? The integration tracker is basically a document is that you can use during the course of the deployment to kind of track what exactly are all the files that I need for a particular deployment, right? So, right when you get the system, right, unless of course you've deployed a Reba in the past before and you know exactly what it is that you're doing, it can get a little overwhelming when you see that, okay, how do I go about creating data now in the system, right? So what we've basically done is, we've said that, okay, so typically the things that you need to get a transaction, to create a transaction in the system is you need like what user data, you need accounting data, you need supplier data, right? These are at least the three core basic information that you need. Of course, there are other pieces of information too, depending on the requirements, but that's one thing what we've done is, we've kind of divided these, okay, what are the different categories of data? We put all these data files that are required in different categories. Okay, so there's the common accounting data, right? There's a supplier data, custom groups, users and groups, uh, payment details, commodities, right? We've put this into different sections, taxes and all of that, right? And what we've then done is, okay, we said, okay, what are the files that make up all the accounting in the system, right? What actually files are that you need to load so that you can create accounting data in the system, right? So starts off right at the top, and there is dependencies built in as well, which basically means that, okay, if I'm going to load account type.csv, right, what should be loaded before I do that, right? Yeah, right here, there's a section called file dependencies, which basically says that, okay, if I'm going to create purchasing units in the system, there's absolutely no dependencies, right? I could just take the file and let me click through this and just show you what it looks like, right? So what this is basically telling you that, okay, in order to create purchasing units in the system, I need to be, creating a file called as purchasing unit.csv and loading that into the system. Okay, so and what exactly makes up or constitutes the purchasing unit.csv file? So this is basically just saying that, okay, if you're creating a file, you need to have the following columns there, right? The unique name, description, logo, file name, whatever. What are the other column names, right? And what you need to always do when you're creating this is always look and see when is this field required, right? If you see always against it, that basically means that you almost always need to have that particular file created. That particular column header should be part of that file, right? So for example, let's just say I was creating a purchasing unit in the system. Let me just show you the quick example just to say, so I'll have something called as unique name, right? That's definitely needed. Let me just take these and paste that here. Oh, where's that?
So while you're doing that, would the integration tracker change if using CIG or native S4HANA?
The integration, yeah, that's a good question actually. So, the when it comes to CIG and S4HANA, the integration tracker will not really be super helpful in terms of if it is to know what the file names are and all of that, because the CIG does it in a totally different way, right? Like you have iDocs which are being exchanged between both the systems. So, all of this is never even going to be seen, right? But, this is more of if you are not going to be using CIG, let's just say this is right at the start, right? Now, again, bear in mind, guys, this is not something that, how would you put it? You're not going to have CIG turned on day one, right? CIG is also a considerable amount of configurations and everything that needs to be done, right? And we are talking about sprint one, where you're making the user aware of the system and all of that. So, it's still important that you know what the formats of the files are and the structures of the file, because on day one, you're not going to have CIG configured and ready to be integrated with master data. So you will still need to create all these master data to load a subset of these data in the system so that you can show transactions to you can show the customer how the whole system works, right? That is by creating a requisition purchase order. For all of that, it's still something useful and something that will be beneficial for your team to know that, okay, if I need to create purchasing units in the system, okay, I just need to quickly create one CSV file and have like just this following columns, and that's it. I'm done. I have a purchasing unit defined in the system, right? So no, you don't need that for CIG, but this is still something that your teams will find useful as you go through the deployment. Okay. All right, so now when we create purchasing units, right, like let's just say purchasing PU01, right, and say PU1 and description, whatever you want to give it, right? So essentially you create a CSV file with just this things in here, right, with unique name, and description, and save it as purchasing unit.csv, and you load that in the system, you're done, right? You've created a purchasing unit in the system. Right, so that's how you use this file. You basically go down, you see what the column headers are, and then create this file based on, what is required. Now, there are other things, when we say, you may not need the logo file name. Let's just say you're not doing anything complex. You're defining one simple purchasing unit in the system. You don't need all these complexities, right? So you could just leave this blank. Don't even call them out. Your file is just these 3 columns, and that's it, right? Okay, so an important thing to remember, guys, is when I load this file, right, if I create a file, this will error out, right? And the reason why I say that is because of the fact that column headers are case sensitive, and they should be exactly in the format that we've called out here, right? So if you see in my case, see how I spelled N as an uppercase, while it actually needs to be lowercase n, right? So it's important that you actually define this exactly the way it's called out here. If you do it in a different way, when you try to load, you're going to get an error, right? And another thing is, this is again, these are things that we've seen partners do, and we want to make sure that you as partners don't hit those same, don't stumble upon these same problems. Is when you're going to be creating files this way, always please make sure that you are not editing this using Excel, right? Now, if it's all, if it's just alphabets, it's okay, you can use it. But if it's alphanumeric too, you're fine. But the problem that comes up is for, let's just say you load this as, let's just say the unique name of this particular purchasing unit was 001, right, for whatever reasons. And maybe this is not a good example here for purchasing units. It'll come into play when we're talking about, let me just go there quick. Right, let me just show you in general ledgers, because this is where we've seen this happen a lot. So you have all these columns here that let me just quickly, right? So you have all these columns here, right? And the PUKRS is typically the company code, right? And the SAKNR, that's basically the general ledger value for SAP systems, right? Now, most of the time, we've seen that sometimes general ledgers have leading zeros, right? So if it says 00234, right? So see what happened right there? Like Excel kind of eats up the leading zeros there, right? So when you load that in the system, Ariba is going to see that, oh, okay, so on the file that this person created, there was only 234, so I'm going to create the GL with the unique name as 234, right? So it kind of ignored the fact that there was 000 here before that, right? Now, of course, there is a way around this is, if you kind of say that, okay, this is a text field and all of that, and then you call it out, that's fine, right? If you do that, it's going to work fine. It's not going to give you an error, but then that's something that you have to be aware of when you do it. Now, this might be simple, but imagine you're loading a file with like say 100 general ledgers, right? If you forget about that and you just load that, you have created like a bunch of general ledgers in the system, which has nothing defined in the customer's ERP system, right? So what we always recommend is if you're going to be working on a Reba deployment, it's always advisable to get a CSV file editor, right? You can buy any CSV file editor that's in the market, like, but it's always beneficial to get one because that way it's going to reduce the headache, or else you'll have to open this in text pads. And again, if it's a small file, it's always all right, but the moment you have like a 60, 70 file, opening all this in text pad becomes a nightmare, right? So please bear that in mind, guys. Always make sure that you at least have a CSV editor. If that's not something you have, make sure that if you're using Excel, please take care of marking every field as a text field and not just leaving it as is. Okay. All right. So that's the just a quick listing on the CSV files. So in the same manner, right, you can go through each of these files. Each of these files actually defines, okay, what should be the column headers for that particular file, what should be the values that should be involved, and when are all these fields required, if there are any restrictions and all of that, right? So that's essentially the essence of the integration tracker. Now we have built this out for like to say that, okay, if you're going to be creating company codes, what task in Ariba do you need to be you know uh, pulling up to create those company codes, right? Now, for those of you who've done deployments in the past, this might seem pretty, this is like, yeah, I know this, I've done this in the past. But for if you have a new consultant who is starting off on your deployment, this is going to be something super beneficial for them, where they say that, okay, company code.csv, here's what defines company codes. This is the task that does it, and it gives you a file description, right? We kind of, even from a tech standpoint, we kind of say that, okay, so what exactly is company code? We say that is the SAP accounting entity company code, right? It represents an independent accounting unit within a client. So we kind of went to that extent and kind of defined all of that. And we say that when is this task needed, right? So that's basically saying is that, okay, when do you need to define company codes in the system, right? So for an SAP, if a customer's backend is an SAP variant, then you always need to have that defined, right? It's not an option. Let's just say if your customer says, "Oh, I don't really use that on my SAP side," then on the Ariba side, you need to define a dummy company code, right? You could call it 001 basic company code or dummy company code, whatever, but you still need to define one because that's needed on the Ariba side for SAP backends. Okay. And there's a lot of other information on this, like in terms of, you can filter this by solution. So, this is something that we built out for like other Ariba solutions and other Ariba solutions, but you can always, filter it out saying, okay, if I'm doing a P2P or a Ariba buying and invoicing, just filter out and say, what are the files that I need? So, and, there's an important section here where to load an FPC, and I'll come back to this after I cover a certain section of my presentation on, multi-ERP sites. Okay, the rest of these guys, the rest of the columns out here is purely for your project management perspective, right? If you have a tech consultant on a project who's doing it and he's kind of tracking, okay, what are the files that I need from the customer to kind of get through this deployment? This is a useful tool, right? We don't really force you to say that, oh, you need to fill this out and give it to us. Like if you don't need it, if you're just using it for referential purposes, you could delete all these columns, right? These are things that, we've seen some of the partners use and we thought this is going to be useful for you. So if you don't need it, you're always free to delete it. This is out there on our Jam and you can download it. You can make modifications for yourself too, right? If there's some pieces of information which I think will be helpful to capture this particular piece of information on this, then by all means, please go ahead. Okay, so I'm not going to go through each of these, every single file in this to kind of go through all of that, right? So the way we've broken this down is accounting, right? So this is exactly all the different accountings that we have. Then there is, if you're creating suppliers in the system, what are the different suppliers that you need, right? There's supplier consolidated, which basically defines suppliers, supplier location consolidated, remittance locations, combos between purchase org and suppliers. Again, this is very ERP specific. So, this for SAP ERPs, this is needed. So the same way, if you're creating custom groups in the system, what are the files that make up that? Users and groups, what are the files that make up that? Payment details, commodities, taxes, budget, fund. So these are all complex features. You may not need all these, so you can easily delete all these sections saying that I'm not using Ariba's fund management module for this particular deployment. Just get rid of all of these. Okay. Uh, So that's it about the integration tracker, guys. So this is a useful tool. Again, we recommend that you use it. You don't have to use it. If you think that, nope, this is not very useful for me, that's fine. You can just forget about it. But we've seen partners, especially partners, who are right now deploying on their third and fourth deployment. We've seen that, at the initial stages when they were on their first and second deployment, this was something that was super helpful for them. Okay, this kind of, took them through that, that learning curve was made a lot more easier because they knew exactly when they go through this, okay, these are the files I need to create users in the system. These are what I need to create suppliers. So now they're pretty well versed on that. Okay, so that's the integration tracker, right? Now, so an important thing that I need to cover with you guys as well is, so we spoke about, the previous file that I just showed you is an SAP variant, right? Now, on the Ariba side, right, whenever a customer's realm is created, there are three different variants that it gets created as, right? And this is because, so that it's closely in sync with the ERPs, right? So there is something called as an SAP variant, right? So this is the variant that it kind of mimics the accounting structures and some other validations and dependencies are similar to what's defined in SAP, ECC or S4, right? It's similar to that. So when a customer, if they have an SAP or an ERP an SAP or ECC or an S4 HANA backend, they will always be set up as a SAP variant on the Ariba side, right? So this is important simply because when you go do a particular deployment, let's just say you are on an SAP deployment, please don't assume that the next deployment that you get, if you are with another customer who has another ERP as their backend, they're not going to be set up as an SAP variant, right? So everything changes, right? The accounting structures change, any internal validations and all of that change. So that's something that, you will have to get familiar with. Now, I said there are three variants in the how SAP the Ariba realms are set up as, right? So one is SAP variant, the other one is there's a PeopleSoft variant, right? So that is if the customer's backend is PeopleSoft. To be honest, we have not really seen a lot of Snap deployments where PeopleSoft has been the backend. I guess there's not a lot in the mid-market space. I'm not saying there isn't any, but there's not a lot that we've seen so far at least, right? And the third variant is a simple generic variant, right? Now, a simple generic variant is basically the variant that the realm is set up as if the customer's ERP is anything other than PeopleSoft or an SAP variant, right? Now, it could be Great Plains, Microsoft Dynamics, Intact, all these little ERPs that you have out there. In all those cases, the customer's variant is going to be set up as a simple generic variant, right? And again, simple generic variant basically means that, everything in the system is very generic, like all the accounting information and all of that is something that which can be tailored to the customer's ERP system, right? So they might have, just going to take a few examples, like, they might have something called as dimensions defined. They might have like, different dimensions that gets used while creating purchase orders. So all of those are things that, we can configure the system to kind of mimic what's in their ERP system, right? So bear in mind, guys, these are always like, three variants that the customer's instance is going to be set up as. So please don't assume that, yeah, okay, everything is going to be set up in SAP variant and you'll have to make changes. No, that's not the case. Only if the customer's backend is an S4 and ECC will it be set up as an SAP variant. Okay. All right. So the next piece of information that I want to cover is the customization tracker, right? Now, this is an important document as well. This is something that, you know, we hope that you would never have to use it, but if you have to, that's fine. So customization tracker is basically your way to tell, when you're working on a deployment, chances are there might be a customization that the customer might say that, hey, this is absolutely needed for us. We can't, all our end users have been trained to use it this way, and this is very important in our ERP system, right? In those cases, you can always request a customization from the COE, right? From the Snap COE. We'll work with the internal teams to get those customizations done. But uh, a few things that you need to bear in mind about when you request customizations is you do not have the the freedom to like request like infinite amount of customizations, right? When a customer buys a product, they have up to like 5 customizations that they can implement without being charged for it. But the moment they start going above 5, right, we kind of, that's when commercials need to get involved. You need to start talking numbers as well because that's not something that is supported. So they'll have to then, if they need, so let's just say you guys requested 5 customizations, there's something more that they need, right, for whatever reasons. At that point, we are kind of, you will have to tell them that, guys, if that's the case, then, we need to request additional customizations from Ariba, and then, they need to sign an SO or something, right? Something needs to happen in terms of them being able to get more than that customizations that are requested. So, and what we always advocate with Snap is that Snap is not supposed to be a customized solution, right? Snap is, with our pre-configuration that the Snap COE does, we kind of make sure that, that is good enough for a customer to use with just very minor changes, right? When I say minor changes, I mean configurations, right? Like there could be things like approval flows that needs to be modified, or if there are some um, I don't know, some changes that needs to be done in terms of data itself in the system. Those are all okay. But when you come to us saying, hey, I want this customization done, our team is always going to ask you, why do we need that customization? Is that like absolutely required? Now, if it's as simple as, changing the label that's associated with a field, like let's just say if general ledger is, they want to call it a ledger account or something, that's okay. That's not, we won't even consider that as a customization. But, if it's like something like, hey, we need an additional field on the PO exports or on the okay to pay exports, then that's something that, we will consider a customization. And again, it's not like we're going to say, no, you don't need any customizations. We will definitely hear you out, and if we are convinced that, yep, that's definitely something that you'll need, we'll work to get that in the customer's test instance, right? But if it's something as simple as, oh yeah, they just want to change the order of the fields and all of that, that's not something that we would really entertain. So that it's just a training issue, right? Customers can always get used to the order of the fields on the screen and all of that. Right, so that's just a brief overview of customizations. Now, customization tracker, that's what we basically push to, we tell you that if you request a customization and you discussed it with us, we'll tell you that, okay, can we get this on a customization tracker? Because this is where we are basically tracking what are the changes that are made in the system, right? It's definitely cannot be something that happens via email where, we have our weekly touch points and you say that, hey, can I get that extra field? And we say, oh yeah, okay, cool, we can do it. And somewhere down the road, we'll be like, okay, why did we add this? So that's why this is a tracker for us as well, for honestly for our sanity check as well, to know that, okay, what exactly were the changes that we did? Because bear in mind, guys, a deployment happens, Snap, you go live, and if you roll off as a customer, then we kind of still need to know that, okay, what were the changes that was done in the customer's instance. Okay, so this is just a document, and I'm not going to spend time going over it. We have like a guideline as well. There's a document here. There's a guideline on how you should be filling it. So please always, use this. Be sure to use this document as you go through these deployments and, once we are requesting customizations. Okay, I will stop here on this particular topic. Eric, do we have any questions on that? I doubt this should.
Nope. There was two questions, and I believe both of them have been answered, so I think we're good.
Okay, cool. All right, so moving on, guys. How are we doing on time, Eric? We at 6.
Yeah, about 45 minutes.
45 minutes
So
more?
we're doing good. Yeah, we're
Okay.
fine.
All right, okay. So we kind of spoke about that. Okay, the next one. Okay, guys, if please make sure that you pay close attention to this particular topic because this is pretty important. Okay, multi-ERP overview. All right, so historically, what has happened? When I say historically, I mean just for most part of Ariba, we've always a site when it's set up like a customer site instance when it's set up on the Ariba side, it's set up as a single instance, right? There's just one site that you're maintaining. But what has happened over the past few months is that, every customer that is being set up on the Ariba side right now is going to be set up as two sites, right? So there's going to be a parent, there's going to be a child side, right? So, and this is not just for large enterprise or in Ariba. It's even for Snap as well. We thought this would not apply for Snap, but what we are seeing is that every single Snap sites that are being created right now are always being set up as a parent and a child, right? So what exactly is that is, what you will get is, you are going to get two sites in general, right? So there's going to be one parent site where you're basically going to load all the data that is common across the entire organization, right? So let's just say a company XYZ has, and I'll tell you why I'm using the term across the entire organization. So there's data that needs to go to the parent site, right? So you will load most of the information onto the parent site, and that then replicates down to the child, right? So that I think for those of you who've deployed Ariba in the past, it's kind of also called as an FPC setup or federated process control. The new term that they use now for this is multi-ERP setup, right? So essentially what happens is, information is loaded onto the parent and that information is replicated down to the child, right? Now, a customer can have multiple childs, right? Now, this is particularly in those scenarios. Don't think, mid-market at this point. Think of a large customer, right? Who has, let's just say they have 3 different ERPs, right? They have an SAP ERP in a certain part of, say, in the Americas, they have SAP. They just acquired another unit somewhere in EMEA where they have, and that particular unit has PeopleSoft as their backend, and then another one which basically uses Oracle or something, right? So in this case, you have one company, but it has 3 different ERPs. So that's the kind of scenario where, we kind of, how this whole multi-ERP setups came into being. Now, I guess the most important question in everyone's mind is, so why are we doing it for Snap? Because, yeah, so the reason why we decided to do this for Snap as well is this is basically accounting for expansion, right? Now, if a customer, let's just say a customer who's in the mid market, right? They are on like Microsoft Dynamics, right? And they went live. They're okay, good now. Say 4 or 5 years down the road, that company has grown. It's become pretty large and big, and now they're moving to an SAP ERP system. So at that point in time, instead of if it was just set up as one single site, then essentially what would have had to happen is, they would have to just, purge all that old data that was there for that particular site because now they need to set up that that customer site as an SAP variant. So remember where I talked to you about the 3 different variants, right? There's the SAP variant, simple generic, and PeopleSoft. So if this was only one site and the customer was on, say, Microsoft Dynamics, that would have been a simple generic variant. And if they moved now to an SAP variant, what would need to happen is they'd have to recreate the entire site again, right? So that they would basically lose all the data that was there unless there's some data migration in place, that's some services that they subscribe to. But so you see how that can become a problem where they are going to not that they'll have to literally lose the capability to use Ariba until that next deployment happens for the SAP variant. So that's where this kind of a setup comes into play is you have there are basically hooks on where you can say, okay, right now we are set up as a simple generic. Let's just say tomorrow they're going to migrate to SAP. Then all we need to do is we just need to come here and add a child onto the to this particular configuration, right? Um, so that's essentially how this whole FPC setup is going to work. Like, there's going to be one parent and there's going to be one child. Now for Snap, let me talk specifically about Snap. Right? For Snap, what's going to happen is you're going to still get two sides. There's going to be one parent side and there's going to be one child side. Right? All these multiple children that you see are not going to be set up. That's just for it's there for future expansion if the customer needs, but it's not something that's going to be set up right away, right? So you're going to have one parent, one child, and what needs to happen is, so this is an important concept is you need to understand exactly what data needs to be loaded in where, right? Like, so, anything that's enterprise specific, that needs to go to the parent side, right? If there is information in there which is very specific to the ERP itself, that needs to go into the child. Right, so now again, there are so many different scenarios that you can do is like, let's just say there is, approval processes, you can, catalogs, let's go with catalogs first, right? Catalogs, ideally you load that into the parent, right? And then the child needs to subscribe to that catalog from the parent, right? So there are complicated scenarios involved here, and that's something that, as you are in those deployments, I don't want to say that you don't need to think about it right now. It's definitely something that you need to be aware of because this is how all the Snap configuration realms are going to be configured from this point onwards, right? I think it was until last August, I think, that it used to be configured as a single site. From this point onwards, it's all going to be configured as this multi ERP setup where there's going to be one parent, one child, right? So I was talking to you about catalogs. Yeah, so catalogs, you load that in the parent, you subscribe to that from the child. Right now, there are all the user information that goes to the parent. Now, remember, these two sides are connected, right? The parent and the child are connected. So it's not like, if you load the parent, then you still need to load things into the child as well. But, that information replicates down from the parent to the child. Okay? So please make sure that you understand what this setup is and how this whole thing is going to work, right? Now, you can always and one of the things that I want to show you guys is again, this is something that we will so let me so this is a guide. Again, this is one of the guides, one of the documents. Again, one of the many reasons why we say that you should have a Connect account. The multi-ERP configuration guide, right? So this basically explains it's a little bit of a read. There are 88 pages in here, but it's important that your teams kind of start understanding how this whole thing is going to work, right? So this document is one of the best good documents out here, which covers exactly how this whole thing is going to work, right? So please make sure that this is something that your teams are aware of. Now, it is possible that if you don't have access to the Connect account, what we will do is we'll upload this particular document onto our Jam as well, right? We'll put that somewhere in there and just send a notification out saying this is there. But please make sure that you're familiar with this document and how this whole parent-child relationships are going to work. Right. So important things that you need to focus on is, how data flows between single and multi, between these different configurations. And, if you go down here, it says, how is this all going to, in these configurations, how is it all going to go? There's user and group data, supplier data, accounting data, and it goes to that level of to say that, where should this be loaded and all of that. Okay. So it's pretty important that your team gets familiar with this guide. So please, take that as an action item that, download this guide and get familiar with it. Okay. Um, Another important thing I said that I would come back to at a later point is on the integration tracker. You know, uh, you know, what we've also done is, we've kind of said that there's a column in here called as where to load an FPC, right? Well, this should read as FPC slash multi ERP, right? It's the same name. So in this case, what we've said is, okay, if you are going to be using, say, let's just go with something simple for now. Okay, currency conversion rates, right? Where should that be loaded, right? So we kind of say that, yep, that should be loaded in the child. If there's PO conditions.csv, we say that, okay, that should be loaded in the, I'm sorry, that should be loaded in the parent. I'm sorry, currency conversion rate should be loaded in the parent. PO conditions should go into the child. And we've kind of called out here is, if so, again, as you read through this guide, you'll see that, multi-ERP sites, I told you that information is replicated from the parent to the child, right? Now that information, the way in which these sites are connected, right? We kind of say that, okay, is this like a single site where it's like, one ERP across all the different childs, or if it's a multi variant site. Now we configure every system to be multi-variant, which basically means that it is possible that there is a child which is SAP variant, there's another child that is simple generic, there's another child that is PeopleSoft. So that's how we configure it to account for expansion for a customer. So when you're going through these docs and you say, okay, item category.csv, where do I load that, right? It says for multi-variants, right? That should go on the child. So you can ignore everything where it says single, because by default for Snap, we are making sure that every site is set up as a multi-variant, that the connection between the parent and the child is a multi-variant format. So that way you can just say that, okay, if I'm loading item category, account category, company code, you see that everything goes to the child. So typically, just as a rule of thumb to kind of, as you navigate through this to the multi-ERP setups, one thing that you need to just, to keep in mind is that if it's anything specific to the ERP, then that always goes to the child, right? So accounting information, right, is always very ERP specific, so that always goes to the child. But, users are it has nothing to do with accounting, right? You're just, I mean, there might be user accountings, that's a different story, but creating users in the system, they need to be loaded and created at the parent. That information replicates down to the child, right? And now if you need to add specific information for that user, like their accounting information, GL, and all of that, that is something that is you can account for by loading that information in the child itself. Okay. All right. Um, what else around multi-ERP setup? So yeah, I think that's at a very high level overview of how these FPC or multi-ERP sites are going to be set up. Again, like I said, this is not something that's futuristic. It's pretty much already here to stay, right? And it's not like we're going to go back to creating single variants for customers anymore. So every single, if you sign on a deal and the deployment is about to begin, you should be expecting a a multi-ERP setup coming your way, right? So please make sure that you get familiar with how this is done and how this whole thing works. Okay.
Denzel, there's a question. It says, does that mean there are two realms for the customer at a minimum? Yes, that is correct. There will be a parent and a child for the test environment, and there will be a parent and a child for the production environment.
Correct. Right. Yep, that's right. So it's a parent-child in the test, and yes, I'm just repeating what Eric said, but yeah, that's essentially what it is, right? You will have two sites to manage, and so here's the thing, one of the questions that we often get from some of this past few partners who started off on these multi-ERP deployments is, oh, is that more efforts than than a single instance, right? So we've gotten. So let me just go over some of the questions that we got from partners when we started rolling this out to them is, oh, can we just use the parent and not use the child, right? Because they thought, okay, no, it's just okay. We just need one side. We don't care about the child. But no, you can't do that, right? You still need to be using the parent and the child in tandem, right? So that whole parent and child thing is considered as one setup, right? So that's a common question we got. So the answer to that is no, you have to be using parent and child together, right? You can't be just loading information in child because bear in mind, guys, oh yeah, this is important. I didn't get a chance to touch on this, is transactions, right? Any transactions that you are creating, right? Like, so for example, if you're creating a purchase order, you're creating a requisition, you are creating that in the child, right? And your average user, right, the customers, end users, they are not going to be going to the parent at all, right? The parent, you can think of it as like an administrative only personnel kind of a realm, right? You don't need end users getting access to that particular realm at all. So please make sure that that customers are aware of that, and there are different setups that you need to do, and that's I'll go with that point too quick before I move on. But yeah, bear in mind that transactions are always created in the child, right? The end users would never log on into the parent to create a transaction. I mean, you could try and log on, but you're not going to be able to create a transaction because there is no ERP specific information in the parent, right? The parent has just very generic basic informations like user data, supplier data, so there's nothing in there for them. So make sure that when we give you the sites, pre-configure the sites and send the URLs over to you, make sure that the end users are aware that they are clicking on the child URL to log into the system and not the parent URL. Okay. And a user can have access to both the parent and the child, and they can do that from within the child itself, right? Once you log in as a child into the child instance, let's just say this is an admin user who needs to go to the parent side, right? There's a small link that comes up at the top right corner of the screen. I can't show you one now because I need to be logged in into a site and I can't log in into a customer site for privacy reasons. But um, there's a link that comes up at the top right, and if that user has the permissions to go to that site, he will see that link and he can click on that and go to the parent, do what he needs to do in the parent, right? That's not something that the end users have access. So you need to make sure that you understand how users are supposed to be created so that they don't have access to the parent at all, right? They should only the regular users who are going to be just creating purchase orders should be using it just for the purposes of and just go to the child and create all their transactions. Okay, so
Then
that's
so there's one more question. Why did the multi ERP become a requirement? Was it for technical reasons? I think it was because of both. But you want to take this one? I mean,
yeah.
I
No, I
could
can.
give my version.
Sure, go ahead.
No, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
Yeah. So the again, I think that was Charles. Yeah, right. So Charles, the reason why that became a requirement is to, as I was stating at the start, right? This is to account for expansion, right? Because remember I said that, once you set up a certain variant, if the customer moves on to another ERP, you kind of need to dissolve that site completely and basically do a redeployment, right? So now, and that basically means that they're not going to be able to use Ariba for till the time the deployment is complete, even though they've been using Ariba for like the past 6 years, right? So to avoid that is where they said, okay, let's create this in such a way that we create a parent and a child, and tomorrow if um, the customer subscribes to another ERP, right? If they have another ERP system, all we need to do is we just need to dissolve this child and just add a new child to it. There is still a deployment factor associated with it, but it's not as intense as getting rid of the customer's site completely, removing their you know the ANIDs that are associated with it. The customer can still retain all of that, and this can happen in parallel too, right? So let's just say the customer has an existing ERP with the one child that can still be active and they can still be creating transactions when this is deploying in parallel, right? So that's one of the reasons why there was a strong push for making even Snap customers, and actually that that was one of the major reasons where we said that Snap customers are always going to grow, right? Nobody is going to be staying in the mid market for a long time, but they're always going to be growing into like a larger enterprise, or at least they hope they will, right? So that's the reason why we said that this is going to be the norm from this point onwards. Yep, future expansion. Okay. All right. Any more questions around this one, guys? Okay, cool. The next topic that I want to quickly go over is the uh, hey, can you still see my screen? Yeah, no, no.
Yeah, I
Ignore,
can.
ignore, sorry. Okay, integration overviews, right? So this is also another intense topic, but again, guys, all of these topics individually we could go on for hours on it. So trying to condense all of this in 2 hours is pretty challenging, but we tried the best we could. Okay, so integration options, quickly data transfer options, right? How can you exchange data with Ariba, right? So there's essentially three ways. There's a fourth way, which we will quickly touch on, is there's batch files, right? So that's basically what we were showing you in the integration tracker with CSV files, right? So you can create CSV files and you can load that into Ariba. You can do that individually, right? You can create like, just say, we went over the example of, what was it? General ledger, right? Yeah, so we said, okay, you can load general ledgers like individually, or you can get all these files put together and load them as a batch, right? So batch file channel is one option. Web services is another option, right? Now, web services, the thing to keep in mind is web services is typically for transactional data, right? Ariba does not really have a very good web service for master data integration, and this is just web service, right? This is still not CIG. I'm not talking CIG yet, right? So Ariba does not have a real good story for master data integration via web services. It basically just has some interfaces for like maybe 6 data points or something like that. And it really doesn't make sense if you're going to be integrating master data saying, okay, for this 6 data points, I'm going to use web services, and for the rest of it, I'm going to use uh, file channel or batch files, right? That's just not a good strategy at all. So what we typically tell partners to go with is there's no web services for master data, but there is web services for transactional data, right? So if they have a need that customer says I want to integrate all my transactions, my purchase or transactional data in real time, then web services is an option that's available, and it's available for most. I think it's available for all the transactional data points. Now, while I say that, I must also tell you that while it is available for all transactional data, it's not something that on a Snap deployment we don't recommend that you integrate all the transactional data points, right? Our recommendation when we are on a Snap deployment is if it's a Ariba buying deployment, right, with just the buying piece of it, then you should be integrating purchase orders, and you can use web services for that, right? And if it's an Ariba buying and invoicing integration, we say that you should be just integrating the OK to pay or the reconcile invoice that comes out of Ariba. Again, web services are available for that, right? And when you use, so that's an important thing that you need to keep in mind because you will get that ask from your customer that, hey, why not? Why can't I integrate all the other integration points? So the answer to that is you can. Again, our initial when we talk about Snap in general is the Snap code base is exactly the same as a code base that's there for the large enterprise, right? It's not that there's any separate code base for this. The only difference is in the form of deployment, right? So we don't say that when you start adding all these additional integration points, that's where, it's the timelines are going to start getting stretched, right? When you're doing one transactional data integration point, you know that, okay, I need to get all the master data and I just need to integrate this one transactional data. And that's going to I'm going to get there in 12 weeks. But the moment I start adding extra integration points, so let's just say I'm doing buying and invoicing deployment, but I keep adding, okay, I want to do the purchase order integrations too. I want to do the receipt integrations too. I want to do reconcile invoices. All of these integrations are going to eat into your timeline, right? And we again, this is not something that we say that Snap customers cannot do. You just can't do that in phase one, right? In a subsequent phase where they sign additional SOWs with you, you can always do all these things. There's nothing stopping them from doing that, right? Or maybe it's some parameters that needs to be turned on or off, but that's pretty much it, right? It's not like it's not available for these Snap customers. Okay. All right. So that's web services, right? And the other point on web services is, the it's we support, like, a middleware application is required on the customer's side. If they are going to be using web services, they can use anything that that's available in the market, right? We don't recommend any. There's PI, PO, BizTalk, TIBCO. All these different things are something that the customer can use, right? So they should, if you come to us with question like which one should they use, we'd be like, hey, whatever works best for them, right? We don't have a recommendation that you need to use this. What we've typically seen is it's pretty easy when you with an SAP integration backend, when you use PI, PO, that becomes a little easier because there's a lot of out of the box content that Ariba provides. But if it's with the others too, it still has been done and it can be done. It's just that it might take some time, but that's fine, right? So that's something that that you'll have to have those discussions with the customer's IT teams. Okay, the last one is SAP Direct Connectivity, right? So this is a new feature that, well, it's not new anymore because it came out like 2 years ago now, 2 to 3 years ago. So direct connectivity is basically, it's a way where you can directly connect from your SAP, ECC or S/4HANA systems to the Ariba instance, right? You don't need any, typically when you use batch file channels, I didn't cover that topic, but there is something called as the integration toolkit that they use to leverage to transfer data between the two systems. That's basically, it's just a small installation which basically takes data from point A to point B, right? That's used when you use batch file channels. Now, the reason why direct connectivity came into play was, there was a lot of pushback from customers that we saw that, hey, why do I need to install one of your softwares behind my firewalls? I'm not comfy doing that. So that's when we said, okay, fine. So that's when this whole direct connectivity came into being. So what this does is it's a direct transfer from the customer's ERP instance to the Ariba buying or the Ariba buying and invoicing instance, right? You don't need any kind of middleware or anything for that. It's just a direct connectivity that's set up by, I think it's like in a SOAP header. All these messages are enclosed in a SOAP header or something. Uh, it can be done over mediated connectivity as well. You can use direct connectivity over a mediated connectivity, but a straightforward way is to just do it directly. But if you do the PI/PO version of it too, that too works, right? That's a possibility. Okay, not going to spend too much of time on this one, right? This is basically Ariba. How can Ariba procurement receive data, right? So that's basically what we just went over with. You can have either direct connectivity going and giving data into Ariba, or you can have file channels. The file channel mode of doing it. Now that can be done either via the ITK, that's that data transfer tool that I was talking about, right, for batch file channels, or you could do, via the actual admin UI, which we'll go through. And if you're doing it via the UI, you always have the option to do it, one event at a time, right? So that example I was talking to you about, you can either load one general ledger, or you can, group together general ledgers, company codes, cost centers, everything into one zip file and load that. So that's that batch of several files that you can load together, right? So that's direct connectivity, file channel, and then there's obviously you can do things via the UI as well. Now, creating the things via the UI it's not supported for every data point, right? You can just do it for like maybe suppliers and users, and that's pretty much it. Like you cannot create company codes and general ledgers and all of that via the UI. So it's just a small subset, but it's a possibility, right? We've seen some customers, some Snap customers to say that, what, I'm just going to create all my users just via the UI. I'm not going to spend too much of time trying to integrate it for now. And always, in future phases, they always decide to now go more complex and say, okay, now let's talk about integrations. right? And web services, I told you it's limited, so don't even bring that up to your customer. Don't even tell them that there's a way to do web services for master data. This topic is how can a Ariba receive data? So it's essentially talking about master data. So web services not really supported, so don't even talk about that to your customer. How can SAP Ariba procurement give data, right? So this is transactional data that is coming out of the Ariba systems, right? So there's a bunch of ways to do that. There's, you can have flat tables, flat files, right? So there can be files like, all the purchase order files can be sent out of Ariba, like all the anything that whatever is on the PO can be put onto CSV files and sent out of Ariba, right? So those are basically flat files. Now you can automate that, right, via the ITK. So you could tell this when you configure the ITK system, you can actually tell that hey, every 20 minutes go into the Ariba system and poll for new uh, POs that were created, right? So that's something the ITK does. You can do it manually via the UI. I've never seen that being done. I've not seen any customer actually go and export purchase orders out of the system and take that zip file and go into the ERP. So most of the time, it's that's not even an option people use. Web services definitely supported, right? For transactional data, we talked about it. For purchase orders, receipts, okay to pays, all of that, and direct connectivity as well, right? So direct connectivity too is supported for both master data and transactional data. So if you set that up, that's something that can come in handy for both transactional data and master data. Okay. So that's essentially the main, integration methods. And again, like I said, this is at a super high level, right? I'm not going to details. We could go through each of these web services, talk about how it's set up. All of that is information that is out there on our Jam, right? And we are constantly posting information as well. So that's something that, in case you don't see it, please reach out to us. We'll direct you on where exactly to find that as well. Okay, now CIG, right? So this is something new that has been, it's been the pipeline for a while. It's slowly now, it's come out and it's generally available at this point, right? So at a very high level, with CIG, you really don't have to go through, any of the integration methodologies that I was talking about earlier, right? All of these batch file, web service, well, there are web services in play, but that you don't really need to configure all these things, right? CIG is essentially what you get is, there's something called as a cloud integration gateway portal that gets set up, right? And that is basically sitting on a cloud platform integration, right? It sits on a CPI structure, and that is essentially what is responsible for communication between the customer's ERP system and the Ariba solutions, right? So what now the reason why this came into place is this is going to be the future of integration for Ariba, right? Uh, Most probably all these other older methodologies that we talked about, they will get sunset at some point, not like in the next 2 or 3 years at least, but that's something that will definitely happen. So this is what we are even pushing all our new partners. If there is an opportunity to do that, always try and go the cloud integration gateway route, because this is definitely what is where the future of Ariba integration lies, right? This can seamlessly integrate master data, this can integrate transactional data, and it's not a very complicated setup as well, right? There's some on the customer side, you basically there's an add-on that you need to get added, and there's something called as a cloud connector that needs to get installed, and that's pretty much it. And the rest of all is configurations that needs to be done on the CIG portal, right? Now, what is a CIG portal? That's just a quick UI, and it's basically a UI for integrations, right? You can actually go in there and you can, the setup is not complicated. I say it's not complicated, but pretty certain that when on your first few deployments, if you're trying to do it, you will run into issues, right? We've had some of our partners do that, and they've run into some issues, but again, all of them was because something was not set up correctly or something. So all of that's information that's available on the CIG guides. We don't have at this point any of the guides added on to our Jam at this point, simply because you need to go directly to the SAP portal to actually get all these guides. But we are in the process of getting all these added on to our Jam as well. So in the next few coming weeks, we will be putting on more, installation guides and all that stuff onto the Jam shortly. Okay, so the CIG portal UI, guys, it's a simple, it's like how you're installing an application on your, on your laptops or something, right? It's all wizard-based configurations. There are setups that you need to do. There are configurations that you need to do, but that's pretty much it. The only one thing that I need to point out is, we talked about customizations, so there are XLT mappings and all of that are part of the this whole CIG portal, right? That's already there. There are mappings already in place, right? But for some reason, if if the customer has this thing that, we need to add, additional a custom field or something when it comes with CIG, at this point, what is happening is there needs to be an SR that is created, and the teams actually the customer support does those custom mappings. It's not something that you as a partner will be able to do. It's not something we as a COE is going to be able to do. It's something that's purely right now with the with Ariba support to kind of do if that is needed. If that is needed, guys, again, that's something that you'll have to, as soon as you do the installations, you need to bring that to our attention as soon as possible. And, we'll work with you to tell you that, okay, get that SR created right away, so that it doesn't slow you down, because again, like I said, if the SR gets created and if it's going to take like 6 weeks to resolve that SR, that's not good, and that's going to affect our timelines, right? So again, guys, this is a high level overview, right? This is just the architecture. It's pretty straightforward, but yeah, obviously there's more to it, and the installation guides and everything will talk in more detail about it. And one other thing that we kind of recommend to all our partners is, guys, there are a lot of CIG workshops happening that SAP is conducting. We don't have the exact schedule of that. That's something that you'll have to look for on or if you are working with a partner, um, your partner manager or something, just get in touch with them and try and find out, when the next CIG workshops are going to be conducted. There are a lot of classroom, 5-day workshops that are happening, which I think is going to be super beneficial for you guys. So, if you can get onto one of these classrooms, I think that'll be super helpful, because like we said, that is definitely the future of Reba integrations, and that's something that you need to get well versed in soon enough, right? And this is what we've seen is, some of the partners who've done this one time, they are pretty comfy then doing it for the rest of the deployment, because once you know how to do it, it's just like doing a quick setup of an app on your phone. Okay. Any question? That's pretty much the cloud integration gateway, guys. Any questions on that?
Yeah, it looks like there's one being typed now. And time check done, so we're right about
I
5:50
know.
or
Yeah. I think, and we're
I
starting
would
to lose people
say,
too, right?
yeah, I would say let's just go ahead and wrap up and maybe take a
Mhm.
couple questions if there are any here.
Right. Okay. So I see Lars is asking if CIG implementation is part of the 12-week time frame. Yes, it is. Again, Lars, your initial deployment on CIG might take a little more than 12 weeks, right? We understand that, and it's not like, we're going to tell you that, hey guys, 12 weeks are up. Are you done with your deployment? No, we understand that that's going to take some time. So, if you are on a deployment with us on this one and you're going to be doing CIG, that's fine. We'll make sure that, you have all the necessary information, and, if the timelines get pushed out by a bit from our side, that's completely okay. We're not going to hold your feet to the fire and say, hey guys, 12 weeks are done, the COE is out. Okay. Uh, any other questions, guys? Okay. So, guys, the next section was we were planning to use it for giving you an overview of the Ariba admin and then Spot Buy admin, but it looks like we're not going to have time for that. So maybe, some other sessions we'll try and cover that, or maybe we can record a video on this and upload this so that you guys can view this at your own pace. Uh, in the last 4 minutes, is there any questions that you guys have on any of the topics that we covered for the IT persona so far? I know it's been a pretty brutal session. There's a lot of topics we covered, but uh, hope you guys had a good takeaway from this. Uh, maybe pause for like a
Okay.
minute, Eric, for questions.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll pause.
Okay.
Pause recording.
Okay.
I think we'll call it a day.
I think everybody's heard enough of me, so I should stop. Okay. All right. All right, guys. Thanks a lot for your time. We hope this session was helpful for you guys. And as always, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to us on snap.coe@sap.com. And if you're stuck on anything, or if you need help on anything, always reach out to us.
Thank you all. Take care.
All right. Thank you, guys. Have a great day ahead of you.